Welcome. Thank you everyone for joining us today. We're excited to get started, and Mary Kay O'Connor from IDDBA is going to kick us off. Mary Kay?
Well, hello everyone. I'm really pleased we have so many listeners on this call. As Lori said, I'm Mary Kay O'Connor, the Vice President of Education for the International Dairy-Deli-Bakery Association, and we are delighted to have you join us for today's webinar, Tapping the Momentum of Millennials in Fresh Perimeter. You know, the insights presented today will be based on findings from our latest original research called Engaging the Evolving Shopper, Serving the New American Appetite. And as you'll soon hear, today's retail food landscape is being molded by lots of changing demographics, tastes, and lifestyles. And millennials are driving much of this change. Their surging spending power is an incredible opportunity for your business. And we're hopeful that this webinar provides you and your companies with some helpful information to serve this growing demographic. Now I would like to introduce today's presenter, Lori Demerit. Lori is CEO of the Hartman Group, a leading consulting and market research firm founded about 25 years ago. The Hartman Group specializes in the analysis and interpretation of consumer lifestyles and how these lifestyles affect the purchase and use of household goods, with an emphasis on food and beverage. Lori oversees all financial and operational aspects of the company, including the market research, strategy, and worldview divisions. Her background includes a BA from Cornell University and a MBA from the University of Washington. Lori, we are so pleased to have you present some key findings from our research today.
Thanks, Mary Kay. Hi, everyone. This is Lori. I'm really excited to be doing the webinar today. I also wanted to thank IDDBA. They were absolutely wonderful to work with us on the study. We really enjoyed our partnership. And so I'm delighted to share this information with all of you today. A few housekeeping items right off the bat because we're already getting some questions. Number one, the deck will be made available. You will be able to download this deck at the IDDBA website after the webinar is concluded. The recording of the entire webinar will also be made available for free download on IDDBA's site. So if you think some of your colleagues might be interested in it, you can certainly send them over there. Also, if you have questions, we will be taking some at the end of the webinar, so please go ahead and type those into the Q&A box or the chat box. Please note that if we do not have time to answer all the questions, we will follow up on each and every question submitted. So if we don't answer it on this webinar today, we will get back to you within 48 hours with our response. So please feel free to type those in during the presentation at the end. And then we'll also leave the webinar up for a couple minutes so you can type in your thoughts and we can capture them and get back to you. And then finally, the information that we're presenting today is drawn from the larger IDDBA report, and that is available to members at the website or for purchase for non-members. And Mary Kay will be giving you some information about that at the end of the webinar. So let's dive in. Why do we care about millennials? We're all excited about millennials as marketeers and folks in the industry. You know, they represent the consumers of tomorrow, the youth of today. They're an exciting and interesting group. We're starting to work with them more and more in our day-to-day jobs. Many of us have millennials as colleagues or as children. And those are all kind of fun and interesting reasons, but there's a very pragmatic reason as well, and that's because they represent a very substantial group of consumers. And you can see some of the numbers here. Gen X, who just kind of gets lost in the mix these days, is significantly smaller in size than the millennial segment. And today, millennials represent a larger segment than even baby boomers. And so we know that will be comprised about a third of our U.S. population by next year, and a lot of household dollars are being spent on them. What makes them particularly interesting and compelling right now is they're starting to really form their habits that we believe are going to be significant over the long term. Where they shop, how they shop, what they shop for, what they care about. And so certainly now is the time to start to be a resource for them, be a go-to retailer for them, go-to department for them as they shape and form those preferences. To give you a bit of background on the study itself, we have a bunch of information here that I'll walk through, but this is the methodology. This research was fielded in April of this year, 2014, and consisted of two parts. The first part was an online survey, a quantitative survey that was with a nationally representative sample of adults aged 18 to 74 years. We also oversampled millennials so that we'd have plenty of millennials to work with and that we could dig down and do some further analysis within the millennial segment itself. And we surveyed people who identified themselves as primary shoppers, number one, and number two, as folks who are shopping in the fresh perimeter category. So you can see in the lower left-hand corner there, the way we qualify people is that they had to shop at least monthly in 2 or more of the 6 categories we identified. And in that case, those shoppers, those fresh perimeter category shoppers, represented 83% of all primary shoppers, so a pretty substantial number of them. I would also direct your eye to those icons there. We'll be using those icons throughout the webinar today to represent those categories. And moving from left to right, those icons represent dairy, deli, bakery, prepared food, specialty cheese, and specialty meat. Now, we also conducted qualitative research because we wanted to dig into some of the quantitative findings. And those qualitative research groups were with those fresh perimeter shoppers. We had a broad mix of generational cohorts because we really wanted to understand differences across cohorts. And we also had all of our consumers do a lot of homework up front. So we got to see a lot of pictures of their fridges, of their shelves. They took pictures when they went shopping. So it was really a kind of a full look to help bring to life that fresh perimeter shopper. And finally, in the upper left-hand corner of this particular slide, you can see the breakdown of fresh perimeter shoppers by generation, which pretty much echoes their makeup, their composition within the U.S. population. And I did want to note that in most of the slides you'll see here, we collapse that boomer generation with the silent generation. And so we call them boomers plus because of the fact that they represent boomers plus a small segment of what is known as the silent generation. So, how are millennials changing? Well, certainly millennials are starting to transition, although many of them are still in the time of their life where they might be living at home with their parents or still going to college. Many of them are now entering what we think of as a traditional adulthood, thinking about more adult-centric activities. Many of them in conversations and in surveys start to talk about the importance of their career for them, and in most cases saying that career importance is not just about the money, although that's a good part of it, but it's also about doing something that they feel like they can look back on and feel good about. So there's a lot of meaning attached to what they want to do in their work lives. They have new priorities. We find that when we ask them about what they care about, things like living a long and healthy life, time for friends and family, providing for those dependent on me are some of the top priorities. They're reconsidering some of their habits, and as you'll see throughout the webinar today, they're starting to make what they see as healthier choices. And so this truly is the next generation of adults. Now, not surprisingly, many of these things tend to happen when one has children, and we know that's a big part of it that we'll be touching upon. Another interesting point about millennials that we have seen continue when we do research over the past 5 to 10 years is that they're just in general more optimistic about the quality of their life getting better over time than other generational cohorts. We might attribute part of that to youth, but hopefully this is a change, a sea change in terms of how this generation will age and how they view the future. Millennials are still developing their food habits. What we find is when they leave their parents' home, they tend to embark on what we think of as a bit of a period of rebellion in terms of what they buy, how they cook, how they experience food. They want to explore. But we do find that rebellion period is somewhat transitory, and they tend to return back to some of the habits and some of the preferences that they had when they were in their parents' household or preferences that their parent had within the household. So it's become very clear to us over the years that the real distinct changes in what millennials look like break down into 3 life stages. Number 1 is living with their parents. Number 2 is living without their parents on their own. And number 3 is living with their own children. And it's become quite clear that if you are a millennial that has a child, you're much more likely to look like a Gen Xer with a child than you are to look like a fellow millennial. So we know that life stage is extremely important in terms of preferences. Now, I do want to note that this sort of experimentation with brands is something that a lot of researchers have brought up. And I think the gut sense and gut reaction of all of us is to say, oh, those millennials, they don't really care about brands. They're really disloyal. Why don't they have more loyalty to brands? When we really dig in deep, what we tend to find is it's not an active disloyalty or dislike. It's simply that millennials say, wow, there's so many choices out there. Why would I want to limit myself? Why would I want to just eat this type of food or eat from this type of brand or go to this type of store when there's such a proliferation of choice out there? So we believe it's important to think about brand loyalty in a new frame, which is basically consumers going out during this period of exploration and rebellion, if we want to call it that, and just taking advantage of all the choice that's out there, but then starting to settle into some preferences, especially as they start to raise their own kids. So when it comes down to food itself, most millennials, whether they have kids or not, think about food much as an adventure, as a way to really discover new taste preferences and profiles. And just to back up, I will say that we've heard, not just from millennials, but from other cohorts, there's a really more openness than there ever has been in the past to the American palate changing and adapting to new tastes and preferences. Be that products that are somewhat less sweet, a bit more tangy, tastes that they haven't been exposed to at all growing up. But millennials certainly are driving a big part of this. And with globalization and with technology, it's much easier for us to explore these new foods than ever before. And not only is there an interest in exploring global foods just because of the tastes and the fascination, it's because most U.S. consumers think global foods are healthier. Why is that? Well, they tell us everyone in the world is healthier than American. They must be eating something right. And so there's this halo of health that's put around many global flavors as well. Now, this isn't to say that there's not a lot of millennials that are still going to go through the drive-thru and are still going to have the hamburger and mac and cheese of their youth, but it is not as discordant with them as it is for other generations to have a global food in the morning and maybe have a QSR drive-thru in the afternoon. It's this combination of new and old, of nostalgia and adventure that really fascinates them. Now, when they are experimenting with global foods, it isn't just something as simplistic as, Italian food or Mexican food. We find that a lot of millennials are actually starting to dig in and sample regional specialties. So instead of just Indian food, they're talking about tamal. They're talking about food from the Basque region rather than just Spanish food. So they're starting to want to learn more about the cultural habits and norms that go along with food as well. Cooking. Cooking has been highly underrated by many folks, I think, not just in the Gen X generation, but in the Boomer generation. Millennials have a much higher likelihood to say that they would love to cook more. Only 12% of Boomers claim that they'd like to do more cooking or love to cook. 27% of Gen Xers, and almost half of millennials claim to like to be cooking more. And they certainly approach cooking as something that's a bit more of an experimentation or an exploration. It's very likely in many cases that they might experience a global food at a food service environment or restaurant environment and then decide they want to recreate it at home. So they simply go on their tablet, open up a YouTube video, watch how something's cooked, and then they'll try it at home. And finally, when it comes to menus and food, many millennials like to customize. So maybe making something 90% of the way the recipe told you, and then just sort of throwing in your own sort of personal flair or item or ingredient that you like and see what it ends up looking like. Now, to start digging into some of the data here, we do find, as I mentioned, that millennials definitely are craving variety and exploration and seeking foods. And you can see here in terms of their taste preferences, over 40%, almost half, are looking to try anything new and different or trying new types of ethnic cuisines. We do think that this is probably likely to be one of the lasting sort of impressions that millennials make on American food habits and preferences. We're finding that as millennials have kids, although, as I mentioned earlier, they do return to some traditional foods, they're also much more likely, even than Gen Xers, to expose their kids to things that are more global in nature. So we're starting to see a proliferation of products pop up that are baby food with more unique and exotic tastes. It almost becomes a badge of honor for that millennial to talk about their child really loving the taste of, Indian food or eating sushi at age 4 or, preferring smoked salmon over chicken nuggets. Those things all to millennials are a sign that they're instilling sort of food values in their kid, that it's a good thing to explore, it's a good thing to experiment. And even in non-global foods and non-sort of ethnically derived flavors, we see that returning to traditional categories like milk, for example, here, and maybe using it in new ways. So milk becomes not just something to have as a beverage or on your cereal, but it's something that's an ingredient in a smoothie, or it might even be something that's a snack. So ethnic cuisine is certainly a part of this, but it's not all-inclusive. It's also new and different in the sense of using using old categories in new ways and in new product formulations. In terms of what's important to them, and this data is based on a question that asks how important are the following factors in deciding what foods to eat. And what we can see here is that all cohorts are interested in a variety of attributes, but millennials over-index for all of these across the board. Just touching upon a few at the top here, made with natural ingredients. Now, natural to millennials and to other cohorts is really symbolic of a whole host of other dimensions. Everything from fresh, real, less processed, things I can pronounce, a short ingredient list, minimal processing. That word natural to them is symbolizing a host of things. I do want to note that the word natural slapped on a package does not necessarily inspire confidence, however. Natural is now becoming a word that does have some baggage for a lot of consumers. It is something they believe is potentially just a marketing term, and they are becoming aware of some of the lawsuits that are going on in the industry. That said, millennials themselves will use that term to describe the sort of product they're seeking that has all those other factors of minimal processing and no, as they might say, bad stuff in it. Does not contain GMOs. GMOs, obviously, something that has gone from not being on the radar screen of most consumers 5 years ago to being top of mind for many consumers. We do an annual survey where we list about 40 ingredients or additives to see what consumers are seeking or avoiding. And GMOs have seen the most growth in avoidance over the past 5 years. So again, it's gone from something that has not been on the radar screen to something that is top of mind. I will note that the level of knowledge or depth consumers have around GMOs is very superficial. They can't, in many cases, explain much of it. But we do think, in many ways, the train is sort of out of the station. There is some sort of negative perception there that unless retailers and manufacturers start to speak to, that could potentially be problematic down the road. So just good to be aware of. And then allergens, does not contain allergens. Certainly allergens today are something that many consumers are looking to avoid, whether it's been medically diagnosed or not. They believe they have a sensitivity or an allergy to a very wide swath of ingredients. And it's just sort of a way for them to raise their hand and say, I'm different and special. I have special needs. And in addition to that, allergens in many cases are a sign of processing to consumers, that there might be some things in there that shouldn't naturally be in there, whether true or not. Millennials do prioritize convenient and prepared food solutions, especially compared to some of the older generations. And you can see some data here in terms of millennials' approach to looking for prepared food options, and then those that are relying on takeout or food delivery at least once a week. And what we've heard repeatedly, and I think the quote captures this really nicely, is the idea that a retailer now is seen as a competitor to food service in a good way. So instead of stopping off at Taco Time, which is a regional Mexican chain out here in the Pacific Northwest, a consumer is now saying, well, I can stop at my local grocery store and I can get something instead. And you know what? It's probably healthier. It's probably a bit fresher. And in many cases, I'm paying the same or maybe just a little bit more. So we believe it's definitely time for grocery retailers to be thinking about themselves, especially in the prepared food section and in all the departments we're talking about today, as face-off competitors to food service, be it quick serve, fast food chains, be it quick casual, or in some cases sit-down restaurants even. Consumers are starting to look at the options at all these places as interchangeable and each have pluses and minuses. With regard to millennials in particular, we find that if you look across all of their eating occasions on any given day, 88% of their eating occasions consist of at least some prepared foods. That compares to only 77% of the general population. So clearly millennials are relying heavily on whether it's retailers or food service to provide them with some of those prepared food selections. In many cases, they're adding those to some other fresh ingredients that they're preparing at home. Shopping. I think what's kind of astounding for all of us is to just think about the vast number of places that consumers are shopping these days. The millennials are certainly leading the charge here. So I draw your attention to the numbers there on the upper left, the number of retailers shopped for groceries in the past 90 days. Boomers 6.3, Gen X 7.1, millennials 9 different places. It's really amazing. They're going a lot of places for trips. So despite the fact that we sometimes still hear some consumers talk about their desire for one-stop shopping, the vast majority are not actually acting that way. And if you look across the channels, there's a higher use of all channels among millennials than older cohorts. We've pulled out one here for specialty showing that 46% of millennials have shopped there in the past 3 months compared to only 32% of boomers. And what's perhaps even more interesting is when you ask millennials about a shopping trip. So if you ask them, what was your last shopping trip, where did you go? 56% of those shopping trips were visits to 2 or more stores. And so one trip could consist of maybe going to a supercenter to pick up a lot of the maybe shelf-stable goods and then going to a grocery store for fresh, or going to a grocery store for shelf stable, and then going to a specialty or a natural retailer for some of the fresh, the produce, and the perishables. So over half, and this has gone up 4 percentage points from 2012, over half of all shopping trips made by millennials are now to 2 or more stores. So they're going to different places to buy different things. Millennials are also determining what they want to eat and shopping for it much closer into that eating occasion. And so what we can see here is a statistic that shows that millennials are preparing meals with fresh ingredients purchased that same day. Almost 1 in 5 of them are doing that in terms of those eating occasions. And what we're finding across all cohorts, but millennials in particular, is that people are not stocking up in the same way they used to on groceries. Right? In the past, there was really a need, frankly, a practical need to stock up, because if you tried to go to the grocery store at 6 p.m. on a Sunday, it was going to be closed. And there simply weren't that many places to buy food. Well, now food is available everywhere, right? You can buy fresh foods even at a 7-Eleven these days, sandwiches and salads, et cetera. And so there's not that same pressure or burden to stock up, because now the pantry has really become a roadside pantry, as we like to call it. You don't need a home pantry. The roadside is your pantry. You can stop anywhere for those types of products. And what we're finding is, in addition to the statistics here, 63% of all consumers are deciding what to purchase deciding what to eat within 1 hour of actually eating it. So for many, many consumers, they're not deciding what they want to eat until the very last minute. Now, is that because we all have hectic lifestyles? Absolutely. But it's also more fun. So when we talk to millennials especially and say, what are you going to have for dinner tomorrow night? They give us a response like, well, how do I know? I've got to see how my day goes. I've got to see what I feel like. And so it's not just this time pressure. It's also just this cultural change in terms of how we want to decide at the last minute what we feel like, and then we'll go out and procure it at that last minute. So shopping fresh perimeter categories. These are showing the differences between millennials in red and boomers in blue in terms of fresh perimeter categories that are shopped at least monthly. And you can see for both millennials and for boomers that the dairy category is shopped most often. But you start to see some differences between cohorts as you go down the list here, and especially I draw your attention to the prepared foods, which is the blue icon, and then the specialty meat and the specialty cheese below that, the last 3 icons. There's some fairly substantial differences and statistically significant differences between boomers and millennials when it comes to shopping at least monthly in these categories. And we know that millennials are certainly very interested in fresh and in shopping those perimeter categories. Now, if you look to the right here, what we find that they shop those categories for is not just for ready-to-eat meals, but also for snacks. We are now finding that snacking represents 50% of eating occasions on any given day. So the amount of shopping that's going on for snacking almost rivals that of meals, because it represents so much of our eating. And for many of these fresh perimeter categories, we'd encourage retailers not to think about them simply as an ingredient or specialty item, but potentially as a snack too, because it is making up so much of our eating now. Within these categories, many millennials are looking for retailers to sort of be what we call the sous chef, do the hard work for me, slice that meat in a way that's going to be easy for me to prepare it further. We find that in many cases they might be getting foods from the deli that they're maybe just doing a little extra customization or personalization to, but they're looking for retailers to do sort of the hard work for them so that they can still get creative and customize their food as well. And to sort of put it in a nutshell, what millennials are shopping the fresh perimeter for is what we'd call fresh fast food. So things to eat once they decide what they want to eat, what their gut's telling them that day, to then be able to go there instead of a food service provider in many cases to get something that they can feel good about, but is also something that they can eat in the very short term, because we know there's a lot of what we call immediate consumption going on, buying the product and consuming it within an hour. Millennials over-index almost 30% higher than the rest of the general population for buying something at the grocery retailer and consuming it within the hour of purchase. So now what we wanted to understand was how consumers shopped or didn't shop their primary store for the fresh perimeter categories. And so what this is showing, again, millennials in red, boomers in blue, is the number of consumers that are leaving their primary store for a different store to shop that particular department. And you can see for specialty cheese, it is the highest, it's the department most likely to have both millennials and boomers leave their primary store to go shop a specialty cheese store elsewhere. And when you compare the cohorts, you can see that specialty meat, which is listed as number 2, prepared foods, which is number 3, and bakery listed as number 4, are the departments most likely to have consumers leave their primary store and go shop elsewhere for these items? Now, one would potentially guess that they're leaving their primary store, which might be a grocery store, for specialty stores. And although that is the case in some of these departments, what you can see in red here is that many folks are leaving their primary store for another store that they would call sort of a conventional. Now, this might mean they're doing most of their shopping in a supercenter or a mass discount store or even a club store, and then they're going to a grocery retailer for these categories. We find that's very likely. And then we also find in some cases they may be going to not just natural or sort of fresh format stores, but highly specialty stores, meaning the standalone butcher shop or the standalone cheese shop. Or maybe they're leaving a conventional grocery retailer and going to another grocery retailer that they think of as higher quality. Many of the regional grocery chains have sort of an aura of higher quality for fresh or perimeter shopping. And so this is very much in alignment with what we see in general in terms of the number of millennials shopping a wide variety of retailers. But it's clear that there is a lot of migration from primary stores to other locations. Why are they leaving their primary store to go shop for these categories in other locations? You can see the top 3 reasons in terms of what they claim as their motivation to leave their primary store, broken down by the 6 departments here. On the left, for bakery, dairy, and deli, you can see value coming up quite a bit there. And value to millennials means not just price, that's certainly part of it, but also relevancy to lifestyle. You know, is it customized for my needs? If I'm living alone as a single person, can I get the right portion sizing there? Is there a higher quality that I now see as part of value? A lack of waste where I don't have to buy too much. So certainly value is driving part of that, but we also see things like health and nutrition pop up and freshness in those departments. And on the right, the departments most likely to inspire millennials to go to other stores to buy them, prepared foods, specialty cheese, and specialty meat. We definitely see the importance of what we might call variety, selection, unique or specialty items, or even health-related items. And I'll talk more about what health means in those categories in just a moment. So we see some commonalities here across departments in terms of what inspires consumers to leave their primary store, and we also see some unique differences that might be compelling from a marketing or messaging perspective. Great. Now what I'm going to do on these next few slides is go through each of the 6 departments, and I have 2 slides for each of them. And what we want to understand is what do they like, what are their preferred retailers for each department doing really well, and then on what occasions are they utilizing those departments. And by the occasions, we can identify some opportunities for growth potentially. And so what we'll look at first here is bakery. Now what this is looking at is as they leave their primary store and go to their preferred store, what's excellent about that preferred store? What are they doing really well? And so for bakery, you can see a couple of things that fall out here for millennials, and this is ordered in decreasing importance to millennials. So the things at the top are the ones where they say their preferred bakery is doing the best job. Wide variety. Wide variety, when we talk to millennials, means not just traditional baked good products, but specialty items and even customized items. So specialty can be, just unique things, maybe things that have a more international or global flair. It can be things like gluten-free, and I think you see on the right here, just people making really yummy stuff, but still wanting to get some of those traditional things that they buy at bakery. Environment, and by environment, what consumers mean here is store environment in many cases, and that is the sensory cues, the look, the feel, the pleasant shopping experience, having an informed staff. We know that bakery in particular can be highly beneficial to the rest of the store in terms of that just sensory experience it sends out. And then a host of other dimensions here. And you'll note on this slide, and you'll see this consistently across all 6 departments that we look at, is that boomers are more likely in many cases to rank their preferred store as better on certain attributes, especially things like freshness. And what we can see is that for many millennials, freshness has different meanings, different connotations, and in many cases, a higher bar is set for what freshness means to millennials. Now look at bakery in light of what they think their preferred bakery is sort of good for, what occasion, what need is it serving for them. And what we can see here is that the bakery departments where millennials are shopping do believe that they are providing products that are appropriate for indulgent snacks and special occasions. Now, the way we like to look at a chart like this is to go to the bottom, right, and see, well, where are these bakeries not really performing for consumers? And I do want to note that millennials in particular are becoming very fluid about what a meal or a snack means these days, and also very fluid about what breakfast, lunch, and dinner might be. We're now finding for millennials they are just as likely to have a morning snack, meaning something before breakfast or something after breakfast, as they are to have breakfast. And what they're eating on those morning occasions can be savory, it can be sweet, it can be something that most of us would only think of for dinner or for lunch. And so to millennials, they don't have as many sort of rules or habits around food rituals in terms of when to eat something or how much you should eat or what that product even is. And so we believe, for millennials especially, there's an opportunity to have the department meet needs that maybe historically or traditionally weren't things that we thought about when we think of bakery in this case. So in this case, dinner, obviously, and healthy snacks do not perform particularly well for many millennials, even the bakery that they like to go to. So we believe there's an opportunity to think about some of the trends with millennials when it comes to bakery. Much of what's going on there is with whole grains, with ancient grains, new ways to source slower-acting carbs. We're seeing some consumers returning back from gluten-free and wanting to have very traditionally healthy bread products and as fresh as possible as well. So there's some opportunity here to meet some other needs within even the consumer's preferred bakery environment. Now, in terms of dairy, how are the preferred dairy departments performing well for millennials? Top two items here are foods I enjoy eating and wide variety. Foods I enjoy eating, we typically, when we dig into that, what that resembles or resonates with is any of their current preferences they have, and variety is a part of that as well. And to millennials especially, when you say the word milk, for example, these days, they don't necessarily automatically start thinking about dairy or cow milk. They think about the whole host of other alternative milks out there. They also start to think about different formats for milk, whether it is a protein shake, a protein smoothie, a yogurt drink, and then you start to think about kefir and fermented items. There's a lot of variety right now that they're starting to seek. They still want some of the traditional products, but as we can see, they're starting to seek out things that are more customized to their needs, and that's typically what they mean when they talk about wider variety. So right now, the dairy departments, the preferred dairy departments, are performing quite well, as you would imagine, for things like breakfast and a healthy snack. Yogurts are filling the need there, as well as some of the other dairy products. If you look at the bottom of that list, again, though, I draw your attention to things like lunch and dinner being a potential opportunity for the dairy department as these consumers start to be more flexible about when they eat and what they eat. And really, dairy right now is well positioned in the mind of millennial, particularly as it relates to protein. And we can all thank the rise of Greek yogurt for that. But protein right now is seen by millennials as really the ingredient that can do no wrong. It symbolizes to them satiety, energy, weight management. And so dairy right now has a halo for many of these millennials that is moving towards this direction of the best way to get kind of a clean source of protein. And that means not just meat-based protein, but plant-based protein as well, which I think is a big opportunity area. Turning our attention to the deli department, in terms of what millennials like and think their deli departments are doing quite well on, freshness really rises to the top here, perhaps not surprisingly. Freshness here can mean sort of our traditional notions of freshness, right? The products look like they are fresh. There's a high turn rate. Things aren't sitting in the case for too long. But to millennials, freshness is also cued by call-outs around things like minimal processing, no nitrates. And so there's other elements of freshness that they are coding or looking at to determine whether the overall quality of that department is good or not. The other piece here is environment, and much of that has to do with the human interaction that takes place at the deli department. That positive interaction, again, can cast a very healthy halo across the entire store, and it is one of the few departments where they're guaranteed in many cases to have some sort of interaction potentially. So that's of importance to them and really symbolizes some of that connection or that culinary dialogue they wish to have with grocery retailers. How is deli performing for them right now in terms of eating occasions? We see things like lunch and dinner performing quite well. That's really a go-to place, deli is, for those occasions. And again, I draw your attention to some of the things at the bottom of this chart, things like breakfast or indulgent or interesting snack or even healthy snack. We don't always think of deli as a place to get some of those items, but for one quick example is something like a meat jerky product. Jerky sales are going through the roof right now in terms of packaged jerky, and that certainly seems like an opportunity for deli. That is, again, that kind of perfect source of protein and really growing as a choice, a food choice, especially among females now, as we're starting to see much more interesting taste and flavor profiles and different textures and formats and packaging as well. Fresh prepared foods. In terms of how millennials think about their prepared foods departments right now, freshness is obviously a key part of that. Again, the look and smell of the food, to how it's displayed in the case, to how much it looks like it's turning in the course of the day, as well as foods they enjoy eating. And this again can mean call-outs around new items, seasonal items, local items, way that ingredients within that fresh prepared department have been sourced. It's not necessarily just calling out nutritional values, which I want to be clear on. And you can see even in the rankings, nutritional information, healthy foods don't do quite well. And that's because those cues are just too objective. And what consumers are really talking about here, millennials especially, are cues of freshness that they determine, right, by kind of, smelling it, looking at it. That subjective sense of how fresh it is that can be benefited by call-outs around the narrative behind what ingredients are in it, but not necessarily the clinical or scientific data about the nutrition per se. Within the fresh prepared department right now, not surprisingly, being utilized quite a bit for things like dinner and lunch to eat later. Certainly in terms of immediate consumption, which is here qualified as right away, dinner right away, lunch right away, this department is being used. Again, interesting to consider what are some other occasions where we could think about having fresh prepared be a go-to place, whether it's breakfast, whether it's snacking, more special occasion. One of the fastest growing, not the largest, but one of the fastest growing eating parts during the day right now is what we're calling the pre-breakfast snack. And it's almost this new cultural phenomenon where consumers are having a little something before whatever they have that they call breakfast. So it could be, half a granola bar before they go have a quick workout, and then they're going to have a bowl of oatmeal later. Or it could be when they're at their Starbucks getting a little piece of banana bread, but they're still going to have a bowl of cereal later. So this pre-breakfast snack, and we're finding that increasingly as consumers potentially go to grocery in the morning to source some of their fresh prepared meals for later that day, lunch and or dinner, that might be an interesting occasion to think about as a new day part for fresh prepared. The specialty cheese department, I want to remind you that this is the department that is most likely to draw consumers out of their primary store into a different store to shop. Foods I enjoy eating, again, customized to their needs. Unique item pops higher on this than on other departments. And so that desire to be exposed to more unique cheese products is certainly high, and a reason that they might be leaving their grocery retailer for a standalone specialty retailer or simply another conventional retailer that might be doing it better in their opinion. And we do find that specialty cheese is what we think of as an indicator department for the store. So when consumers think about how to grade the overall sort of quality of a store, they think about produce, they think about bakery, they think about meat, and they think about specialty cheese in many cases. And so this certainly is a department that goes a long way in helping or hurting your overall quality attributions as a retailer. What is specialty cheese being used for right now? Certainly interesting or indulgent snacks. We do find cheese popping a lot on our eating occasions information in terms of millennials utilizing it as a snack, and many of them point to the protein as a healthful piece of that component. So when they're eating a high-quality cheese, it is in many cases seen as a wellness item, not necessarily because of caloric or fat content, obviously, but because it's sort of special quality there, and then the protein content helps as well. Now, as more and more millennials eat what we sort of think of as a tapas-style meal or a mini meal where they're kind of having bits and pieces and bites of different things, we believe that specialty cheese could do an even better job of positioning against dinner or lunch. So as sort of the focus and potentially even the center of a plate on a meal occasion. We could see that evolving within the next couple of years of millennials. And then our last department to look at is specialty meat. And this is where healthy foods really pop. This is one of the only departments where it gets near the top in terms of really being important in a way that's distinct from just freshness. And here what that's about for millennials is the wide, and I'd say probably the majority of millennials these days who are still eating meat, but are looking for certain distinctions and call-outs around meat, whether it is call-outs around particular ingredients in that meat, how it was sourced, humane standards. And I will say for most millennials, humane standards have little to nothing to do with the animal itself and everything to do with the fact that if they believe there's humane standards, there's probably a higher quality product from that care. And so it's a sign or indicator of quality to them. So changes in what's going on around what health means in the meat category is particularly important to millennials, more so than any other cohort. And that sort of humane standards and sourcing piece is a piece of the narrative or the information that they find particularly compelling. And then what is specialty meat being utilized for now? Again, at the top there, dinner and lunch to eat later, so bringing something home that might be the center of a meal. But as you look at the bottom of the list here, there's also some interesting opportunities around breakfast, for example, and snacking. As I've mentioned a couple times, protein being placed so well today in consumers' minds as a healthful ingredient, and protein being sought more and more at the breakfast or morning snack occasion, there could be an interesting opportunity here for specialty meat to start positioning against those occasions as well. So social media, and what this chart here is showing is that in terms of weekly users of social network sites, a wide variety here, millennials are more likely than boomers to use those, and I think we probably all agree that that is self-evident. I think digging into this a little further, there's some interesting things that are going on today that we believe are impacting food culture over the long term and are definitely being driven by millennials. Millennials are changing the way we think about what we want to eat. And it's being driven by the fact that they're going on Twitter, or going on YouTube, or going on Facebook and seeing all these beautiful pictures of food, or I should say Instagram, not Twitter, but seeing all these beautiful pictures of food. And so if you look at a lot of the content that's posted on these social networking sites, it has to do with people taking pictures of meals they made or meals they ate out, and sort of this romanticized language around how wonderful that meal was. And so we're finding for a lot of millennials, what they're doing is finding these images, saying, oh my gosh, that looks great, and then figuring out how are they going to procure it. Are they going to go out to a restaurant? Are they going to go pick it up somewhere? Are they going to try to make it themselves? So we're starting to become a society that's looking at that visual image of food and then working backwards to figure out how we can get it. Number two, food has now become content. In this new digital food life that we're living in, food is content itself. And we find millennials especially are saying things like, gosh, the only way my parents even know I'm alive is because I occasionally post pictures of the meals I'm eating. And then they say, oh, glad to hear you're okay. We find millennials that basically are dialoguing with their siblings, and it's all about food. All the posts are sharing information about food. And what this has done is really move the consumer, the millennial especially, from being just a consumer waiting for something to buy to a participant in the world of food. So they're playing in the world of food. They want to be in dialogue with manufacturers and retailers about food. And so their role has really shifted and made them feel much more hands-on in terms of the choices they're making around food. Smartphones clearly are changing the way that people shop. This was a homework assignment we had consumers do who participated in the study to take shots of what food resources they use, what shopping resources they use. There's a lot out there. Clearly, most millennials have smartphones, and I think we'll likely see this number be close to 100% before too long. But it's almost overkill right now. There's so many apps out there and so many things. And what many millennials are saying is, gosh, I wish it could all be simplified for me. And so there's sort of this trifecta that they're looking for with their smartphone. They say, number one, I want to be, inspired. Show me that picture of something that's going to really appeal to me and whatever I'm craving that day. Number two, when I get to my store, I want my smartphone to tell me where to find all those products, so I'm not having to search around the store. And number three, when I get to check out, can I hand the cashier my smartphone, and will I get any applicable deals or discounts? Can I get some value out of it as well? And so as technology improves and as consumers get more engaged in their digital food life, we're likely to see many more of these things become sort of an easier, smoother transition in terms of the inspiration for what to eat, the convenience and navigation of finding where to buy it, and thirdly, the value of being able to feel like you get the best price on what you were purchasing. What are millennials using smartphones for at a food store? This always makes me smile because what they're using their smartphone for, the number one and number two reason, call my friends or family and find out what we need. So we're using our smartphones for a lot of kind of traditional uses as well, whether it's text or calling. But as you move a little bit further down that list, I think there's an interesting one here, number three, make and manage lists. Now, why is this becoming important? Well, one of the reasons it's becoming very important from a millennial perspective is that within millennial households, there are more than one person in that household doing the shopping for the family. So across the entire population today, we find that men represent almost half of primary shoppers. And within millennial families, shopping is being equally shared in many cases by both adults within that household. And so that has a lot of implications. Number one, it makes it very hard if you're just talking to one primary shopper in a household to find out how much shopping is actually happening and what for. But number two, there's just some pragmatic considerations like making a list. How do you make sure that you're not buying the same thing? How do you make sure that your spouse is buying the right thing? So smartphones are being used for list making that multiple individuals in a household can use. And then number four, explore and find recipes. Clearly, this is the way that most smartphones are being used. And if you ever want to do a little bit of market research, what's fascinating is to go stand inside your store at about 5:30 at night and watch the people coming in with that sort of bewildered look on their face that are running into the store and then kind of do a dead stop right when they get there. And that look is, what the heck am I going to make for dinner tonight? And so in many cases, they're whipping out their smartphone and trying to be inspired, find something interesting, whether that's coming from you, the retailer, in a virtual sense or in a physical sense, having some display there, some cross-merchandising that can help them feel inspired. But we know that's a moment at which smartphones are playing a role in terms of providing consumers with that solution when they realize the whole family is going to actually be sitting down for dinner together tonight, and they have absolutely no clue what to make. So finally, I want to end with some strategies or takeaways on how to engage millennials that were pulled out of this webinar, as well as the larger IDDBA study. Millennials are absolutely shopping multiple stores. As we could see, they're going on average to 9 different stores in any given 3-month period to buy groceries. And importantly, they're going across channels as well. So they're not just shopping within grocery or within convenience. They're utilizing a lot of different channels. They're also more likely than other cohorts to leave their primary store for the fresh perimeter departments. What we know, and we know this about all shoppers, but millennials in particular, is that they are not one-stop shoppers. We do not think that's a behavior that consumers are going to turn back to. So we would caution retailers, or advise retailers, I should say, to think about how are they being shopped? What are millennials utilizing you for? And then really excel at that. Figure out what your signature departments and categories are. How do you play a role in their food lives and really execute well upon that? Millennials do crave variety and exploration and seek foods that offer a discovery. They want unique taste profiles while still having some of their traditional favorites. And these days, we believe that what we've traditionally thought of as the ethnic food aisle will probably go away as ethnic and global flavors are really put in forefront across the store. So it's no longer just stuff in boxes and cans. There can be global and ethnic foods within the specialty meat case in terms of different cuts of meat or different marinades. Within the prepared food section by having Indian prepared foods rather than just traditional American favorites. So this sense of discovery, and we've called it here, in-store culinary inspiration, product discovery, definitely casts a positive halo across the whole store. Freshness, as we could see, was a food attribute with primary importance to millennials. When people ask us, what is sort of the number one trend that's going on, the number one platform that's going to have legs long term, it's the idea of freshness being of importance. We're seeing it impact the center store. We're seeing those center store products that can play freshness cues up, be it through clean ingredient lists and call-outs around where they were sourced. But really, the fresh perimeter departments obviously have an upper hand here in terms of really driving home those freshness cues. And again, it's not just about the look, smell, and taste, although it's part of it, those sensory cues. It's about call-outs around minimal processing, the absence of what they might think of as bad ingredients. And it's also about small scale and local production. And that doesn't have to mean you've got to have, dozens of local products in your store, but in your signature departments, calling out some of the things that you are sourcing locally. There is a freshness cue about local that is, again, underrated, as many people think about local as just an environmental cue or something to do with ethics. For many consumers, local, especially within fresh perimeter departments, means, gosh, it probably just got here in the last couple of days, and therefore it's fresher and healthier for me. Millennials are more likely to seek ready-to-eat choices in the perimeter store departments and other cohorts. Again, this is not just because of their hectic lives, but because they like eating on a whim. They like deciding what to have at the last moment. And so they're relying upon grocery retailers as sort of their fresh fast food providers. Therefore, it's putting retailers in a mindset of having to compete not just against all these emerging channels and not just against grocery retailers, but against all the food service providers that are out there today as well, because that's how consumers are thinking about the competitive set. Eating occasions are much more fluid among millennials. The lines between what is a snack, what is a meal, what's a mini meal are blurring. And so we would say let's not just maximize the opportunity on traditional occasions for the fresh perimeter departments. Let's think about some of those non-traditional eating occasions. How can bakery serve the dinner occasion? How can fresh prepared be about morning snacking or specialty cheese for meals rather than just snacks? As millennials are more open to eating different things on different occasions, but wanting to make sure that as much fresh product gets into their homes as possible, I think we can think about some of these unique opportunities and new forms of modern eating that millennials are engaging in. Millennials indicate that they are seeking variety and good selection in the fresh perimeter departments. This can be interpreted in a multitude of ways, but in many cases, it's things that are indicative of what we think of as more natural items, is what they mean by wider variety, less processed, and then customized diets. There's a lot of millennials experimenting with whether it's gluten-free or dairy-sensitive or the paleo diet. They want to see some of these things that traditionally have been housed only in natural and specialty channels now be housed in their traditional grocery retailer as well. And finally, to millennials, food is digital content. Food is something that's meant to be shared. It's something that they're experimenting with, they're participating in, they're playing with. And truly, as the original food experts, retailers have a unique opportunity to share some of that culinary knowledge and that passion for food with millennials via the digital mediums. And moreover, because millennials are more new to cooking and because they clearly indicate they'd like to do more experimentation with cooking, the good news is they're open to food information from a wide variety of sources. And certainly their preferred and trusted retailer is a part of that subset of resources that they'd be willing to go to for information about food. So with that, I am going to take a look at some of the questions here and address them. Please feel free to type in some more if there's any that come up. One of the questions that came in is, was the 50% snacking true for all millennials, or is there an older versus younger that snacks differently? So what's interesting about the snacking versus meals breakdown, we look at a lot of eating trends, and for snacking there is absolutely no demographic, I should say no statistically significant demographic change between gender, generational cohort, geography, income, education. You can look at every single one, and what we find is that 50-50 split is within a percentage point or two. Now, what snacking means can be different, and so when we talk to boomers, for example, we find that for many boomers, the snacking serve has some of those historical considerations. You know, it's an indulgent time. It's a time that you're maybe satisfying some physical cravings or even some emotional cravings. And for millennials, they're more likely to think about snacking as an occasion on which they're seeking health attributes. Now, part of that is because they feel like, you know, they need to get healthier because we are snacking more. But we're finding things like fresh fruit, fresh cheese, those sorts of things popping up as what consumers, millennials especially, think of as a healthful snack. So that snacking occasion, even though it doesn't have as many rules in terms of culturally or historically speaking, there is a burden on snacking because we're just simply doing so much of it these days. So snacking to millennials in many cases might have healthier connotations than it does to other cohorts. There's another question that just came in about specialty cheese in terms of the interest in cheese as a standalone snack, or is it just coveted as part of a meal? What we're seeing for millennials is that cheese has become a standalone snack. Now, this idea, again, of sort of a tapas type meal where they might combine it with some, you know, a couple crackers or some olives is happening as well. But the cheese is really kind of the center of it. And part of that's because when they are purchasing a specialty cheese, they're getting that narrative or that background or that story around it. They're also, in many cases, paying a premium price for it. And therefore, in their minds, it becomes more of a center plate of a meal and less as just sort of a sidebar. And so that, I think you saw that number one use in terms of occasion for specialty cheese being sort of, you know, an indulgent snack is something that's being utilized. And we think, again, there's even more opportunity there to position cheese as something that can stand on its own legs, not just on a snack occasion, but potentially on a meal occasion as well. Someone was asking about some of the growth and food attributes I was mentioning in the last 5 years, attributes that are being sought or avoided by consumers, and so I'll just touch on that. The ingredients that we see most being sought by consumers are sort of, again, we call them the trifecta. They're whole grains, protein, and fiber, which have historically been near the top and continue to be so across all generational cohorts. So those are sort of the ingredients that can do no wrong. In terms of what some of the other ingredients are that we've seen growth in terms of seeking them, it's things like omega-3s, vitamin D, which might be short-lived because it's kind of been a little bit trendy lately, but the key ones along with calcium tend to stay at the top. In terms of ingredients avoided, and I mentioned obviously GMOs being the fastest growing, the other one that we've seen grow quite a bit in the past 5 years is high fructose corn syrup, which is now tied for #1 with sodium in terms of avoidance. Sodium's been up there for a while. Now high fructose corn syrup is up there as well. And then the other big category where we've seen a lot of increase in avoidance is artificial sweeteners. And that is all, we list them individually, so you'll have aspartame and saccharin, et cetera. All of those have seen a lot of increase in avoidance, and we attribute the reason for that to being that consumers now see a whole host of things they think about as natural forms of sweetener. And I think as you think about the fresh prepared food section especially, things that you could potentially call out about fresh prepared foods being around natural sweeteners would be important. So there's this increasing avoidance of both the highly processed sugars, the high fructose corn syrup, as well as some of the artificial sweeteners as consumers start to seek or believe that there are many more sort of natural options out there for them. And they're looking for those both in packaged goods but also in fresh perimeter department items as well. So with that, I am going to turn things back over to Mary Kay. And as I said, do feel free to continue to put some questions in. We will answer all of the questions that come in, or feel free to reach out to us at any time. And again, I thank you for your attention. And Mary Kay, please help us close off the webinar today.
Wow, lots of great information. Lori, I particularly noted your comments that millennials are much more of a participant in the way they engage with fresh foods today, and that they're looking for food discovery and menu and snacking inspiration from retailers and manufacturers. And I hope that everyone jotted down some new ideas that will help you with your selling strategies. I'd like to thank you, Lori, and the Hartman team for a very informative look into the shopping habits of millennials and the opportunity to work with you on this research and this webinar. And as you might guess, I'd say there's more information on millennials as well as other consumer demographics and shopping habits in the engaging and the evolving shopper research. As Lori mentioned earlier, IDDBA members can access the report for free at iddba.org/research using their VIP number. And non-members, if you'd like to purchase the full report, it's also available to you at our website. Lori noted, too, that this free webinar will also be available at our website, so encourage others to view it. And talking about iddba.org, be sure to check out all of the other resources, including our Trends Report, What's in Store, other original research that we have, our offering of free training tools, and our Dairy-Deli-Bake Seminar and Expo that's coming up in June in Atlanta, Georgia. We really appreciate your engagement with IDDBA, and we'd love to hear from you. You can catch me at mo'Connor@iddba.org. Thank you very much for attending, and please take a moment to fill out the short questionnaire to tell us what you thought about this webinar today. Have a great rest of the day.